We're less than 100 hours into this operation, and we've already struck nearly 2,000 targets.
For weeks, tensions across the Middle East had been building like pressure inside a sealed chamber. Intelligence agencies warned that the region was moving toward its most dangerous moment in years. Then suddenly the explosions began. According to Reuters, Israel launched a series of large-scale airstrikes against Iranian military facilities, targeting missile infrastructure and command centers believed to be linked to Iran's expanding regional network. Within hours, reports of explosions began spreading across several Iranian cities. Satellite imagery and regional reporting later confirmed that multiple sites connected to Iran's missile program had been hit. Soon afterward, the United States entered the operation in what analysts described as a coordinated escalation. The early wave of strikes was massive. Analysts cited by the Washington Post reported that hundreds of military targets were struck during the opening phase of the campaign, including storage depots, radar installations, and facilities linked to Iran's ballistic missile program. But the scale of the operation was not just about numbers. Strategically, the strikes appeared designed to disrupt Iran's most important military advantage, its missile force. For years, Iran had invested heavily in ballistic missile development. Sanctions and international isolation had weakened its air force, leaving Tehran with limited conventional air power compared with the United States or Israel. Instead, Iran focused on building one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. Defense analysts cited by Defense News estimate that Iran possesses several thousand ballistic and cruise missiles, with ranges capable of striking targets across the Middle East. These weapons form the backbone of Iran's deterrence strategy. In simple terms, they are the tools Iran relies on to threaten adversaries without relying on traditional air superiority. That is why the early strikes focused so heavily on missile infrastructure. Satellite imagery reviewed by experts and cited by the Wall Street Journal suggested that several facilities believed to store or launch ballistic missiles had been damaged during the initial phase of the campaign. These sites are often located in hardened underground complexes or mountainous regions designed to protect them from airstrikes. But even the most fortified structures have vulnerabilities. Military analysts explained that targeting entrances, launch tunnels, and radar coordination systems can effectively neutralize a missile base without destroying the entire underground complex. In other words, sealing the doors of the system can sometimes be just as effective as destroying the weapons themselves. The early strikes, therefore, appeared to follow a clear strategic logic: disable the infrastructure that allows missiles to be launched. While the details were still emerging, the implications were already becoming clear. If Iran's missile network were significantly degraded, the balance of military power in the region could shift dramatically. However, the story did not end with the opening strikes. Within hours of the attacks, Iranian officials began warning that retaliation was coming. State-linked media outlets, including Press TV, reported that Iran would respond forcefully to what they described as aggression against the country. The stage was now set for a dangerous escalation. Because Iran's military doctrine relies heavily on missile retaliation, analysts widely expected Tehran to respond by launching attacks against U.S. positions across the region. And those positions are not isolated. Across the Middle East, the United States maintains a network of military bases, airfields, and logistical hubs stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Eastern Mediterranean. Many of these installations support ongoing security cooperation with regional partners. If Iran decided to strike them, the conflict could expand far beyond a single country. And that is exactly what began to happen next. If the opening strikes were meant to send a message, Iran's response was meant to send a warning. Within hours of the first waves of American and Israeli attacks, alarms began sounding across several U.S. military installations in the Middle East. Radar operators detected objects rising from Iranian territory climbing rapidly into the sky before arcing toward targets across the Persian Gulf. Missiles. According to Reuters, Iran launched a wave of ballistic missiles and drones aimed at several locations believed to host U.S. forces. The targets stretched across a vast geographic arc of American military infrastructure, from the island nation of Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, to Qatar, where one of America's largest air bases in the region operates around the clock, to installations in Iraq and Jordan that support American logistics and surveillance operations. For a moment, the region seemed to hold its breath. Air defense systems began activating almost immediately. Missile interceptors streaked into the night sky as defensive batteries attempted to track and destroy incoming projectiles before they could reach their targets. Regional media outlets, including Al Arabiya, reported that several explosions were heard near military facilities across the Gulf. Some of these were likely interceptions where defensive missiles destroyed incoming threats high above the ground. But the scale of the retaliation was unmistakable. Defense analysts speaking to the Washington Post described the attack as one of the most extensive Iranian missile responses in recent years. While early reports suggested that many of the missiles were intercepted, the sheer number launched demonstrated that Tehran was willing to escalate quickly. Iranian state media told a very different story. Outlets such as Press TV claimed the strikes had inflicted major damage on American installations and described the operation as a powerful response to what Iran called foreign aggression. But independent verification of those claims remained limited. Satellite analysis and military reporting cited by Western outlets suggested that while some debris and limited damage were recorded near certain facilities, many of the incoming missiles were intercepted before they could reach their intended targets. Still, the message from Tehran was clear. Iran wanted to show that it still possessed the ability to strike back. And that ability is built around one key element: missiles. For decades, Iran has invested enormous resources into developing one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. Analysts cited by Defense News estimate that Iran's missile inventory may include several thousand ballistic missiles of varying ranges. Some of these weapons, like the Sejil and Khorramshahr systems, are capable of traveling more than 2,000 kilometers. That range places large portions of the Middle East, including many U.S. bases, within reach. But range is only part of the equation. Iran's strategy relies heavily on saturation attacks. By launching multiple missiles simultaneously, Iran hopes to overwhelm defensive systems and increase the chance that at least some weapons reach their targets. It is a doctrine born from necessity. Iran does not possess the same advanced air force capabilities as the United States or Israel. Instead, its military planners have focused on missiles and drones as a way to offset that imbalance. In other words, when Iran retaliates, missiles are almost always the first move. And yet the retaliation also revealed a deeper problem. Even as missiles crossed the skies over the Gulf, another operation was already unfolding thousands of miles away, an operation that would soon threaten the very foundation of Iran's missile strategy. Because while Iran was firing its weapons, America was preparing to hunt them down. While missiles were still lighting up the skies above the Persian Gulf, something very different was happening thousands of miles away in the quiet farmland of the American Midwest. At Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, one of the most secretive aircraft ever built was preparing to fly, the B-2 Spirit. Few aircraft carry the same aura of mystery and power as this stealth bomber. With its unmistakable flying wing shape and radar-evading design, the B-2 was built for one purpose: penetrating the most heavily defended airspace on Earth. And now, according to defense analysts cited by Defense News, the aircraft was being sent into one of the most sensitive missions of the conflict. Deep inside Iran, the mission itself was extraordinary, even by modern military standards. Unlike many aircraft that operate from forward bases, the B-2 can fly directly from the United States to targets on the other side of the planet. But that ability comes with a cost: time. The operation described by analysts and aviation specialists cited by the war zone required an enormous round-trip journey that could stretch close to 30 hours in the air. For the pilots inside the cockpit, it would be a test of endurance as much as technology. Soon after sunset, the stealth bombers began rolling down the runway. One by one, their dark silhouettes lifted into the night sky and disappeared into the darkness. From that moment forward, the mission became a carefully choreographed aerial ballet involving multiple layers of support aircraft, because a B-2 cannot make a journey of that distance alone. Along the route, aerial refueling tankers waited silently in the sky. Massive KC-135 stratotankers extended long fuel booms toward the bombers, allowing them to replenish fuel without ever landing. Each refueling extended the bomber's reach further across the globe. And eventually, the aircraft reached the edge of Iranian airspace. The targets waiting there were not ordinary military facilities. For years, Iran had constructed what analysts often call missile cities, vast underground complexes built deep inside mountains and reinforced with layers of concrete and rock. According to reporting cited by the Wall Street Journal, these underground missile bases form a critical component of Iran's strategic deterrence. Many of them are designed not only to store ballistic missiles, but also to launch them through hidden openings carved into the mountainsides. From the outside, these facilities can be almost invisible, but once discovered, they present a serious challenge. Destroying a deeply buried missile complex requires specialized weapons capable of penetrating layers of rock and reinforced concrete. And that is exactly the kind of mission the B-2 was built for. Each aircraft can carry a range of precision-guided weapons, including bunker-busting bombs designed specifically to destroy underground structures. Military analysts say that when deployed correctly, these weapons can collapse tunnel entrances, seal launch shafts, and effectively neutralize an entire missile complex. In other words, the goal is not always to destroy the missiles themselves. Sometimes it is enough to trap them underground. As the stealth bombers approached their targets, another layer of the operation was already underway. Earlier strikes by American and Israeli aircraft had targeted radar systems and air defenses across parts of Iran. By weakening those defenses, planners hoped to create safer corridors through which the B-2 bombers could pass undetected. It was a classic example of modern air warfare strategy. First blind the defenses, then strike the heart. The moment of attack came quickly. In the darkness high above Iranian territory, bomb bay doors opened. Precision-guided weapons dropped silently toward their targets below. Within minutes, explosions began echoing across the mountainous terrain surrounding several suspected missile facilities. The effects of those strikes would only become clear hours later. But one thing was already certain. The conflict had entered a new phase because Iran's missiles had just fired their warning shot, and now the United States was moving to eliminate them. At first, the night was quiet again. For several hours after the strikes, there was very little information coming out of Iran. The mountainous regions where many of the missile bases are located remained dark, and communication from those areas was limited. But in modern warfare, silence rarely lasts long. Soon, satellite imagery began to emerge. Analysts examining the first images reported signs of structural damage at several suspected missile facilities. According to reporting cited by the Washington Post, some of the most important evidence came from the entrances of underground complexes. Several tunnel openings appeared partially collapsed. In other cases, debris was scattered around what appeared to be launch apertures, carved into the sides of mountains. These openings are critical components of Iran's missile system because they allow ballistic missiles to be launched directly from underground bunkers. If those openings are sealed or destroyed, the missiles inside cannot be launched. That detail matters enormously. According to military analysts cited by the Wall Street Journal, Iran has spent decades constructing a network of hardened underground missile sites designed specifically to survive airstrikes. These facilities are often buried deep beneath mountains or reinforced with layers of rock and concrete. The idea behind this strategy is simple. Even if an enemy destroys air bases or surface launchers, Iran's missiles would remain protected underground and ready to fire. But the recent strikes appear to have targeted a vulnerability in that system. Rather than trying to destroy entire underground complexes, a task that would require enormous firepower, modern bunker-penetrating weapons can focus on entrances, ventilation shafts, and launch tunnels. Destroy those critical access points, and the entire facility becomes useless. Military experts quoted by Defense News say this approach is one of the most effective ways to neutralize deeply buried missile infrastructure. In other words, the goal is not necessarily to blow up the entire mountain. It is to lock the weapons inside. More images soon reinforced the initial assessments. Satellite analysts identified additional damage near several sites, believed to be associated with Iran's missile forces. Some areas showed signs of ground disturbance consistent with large bunker-busting detonations. While the full extent of the damage remained unclear, the strategic implications were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. If Iran's missile infrastructure had been significantly disrupted, it could reshape the military balance in the region. Missiles are the backbone of Iran's deterrence. Without them, Iran's ability to threaten distant targets, including military bases and naval forces, would be dramatically reduced. This is particularly important in the Persian Gulf. U.S. aircraft carriers and naval assets operate within range of Iranian missile systems. Those missiles have long been viewed as one of the primary threats to American forces operating in the region. Neutralizing them even partially changes the equation. Iranian officials, however, quickly pushed back against those claims. State-linked media outlets, including Tasnim news agency, reported that the damage to missile facilities was minimal and insisted that Iran's strategic capabilities remained intact. But independent verification of those statements was limited. Defense analysts noted that satellite imagery and on-the-ground reporting from international outlets suggested that at least some launch infrastructure had been seriously disrupted. And that disruption carries consequences. Because once missile bases are disabled, it becomes far more difficult to sustain large-scale retaliatory strikes. But the impact of the operation may extend beyond the battlefield. The strikes also send a signal, one aimed not only at Iran, but at the entire region. It is a signal about capability and about reach. Because the aircraft that carried out these strikes did not launch from nearby bases. They came from the United States itself, thousands of miles away, which means something else is now becoming clear. If necessary, similar strikes could happen again and again. At first glance, destroying a few missile facilities may not seem like a decisive moment in a war. But in the case of Iran, missiles are not just another weapon. They are the center of the entire military strategy. For decades, Iran has faced a difficult strategic reality. Its conventional air force, once powerful during the era before the 1979 revolution, has gradually fallen behind technologically. Sanctions limited access to modern aircraft and spare parts, leaving the country with an aging fleet. So Iranian military planners adapted. Instead of competing directly with the air power of the United States or Israel, Iran invested heavily in ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. According to estimates cited by Center for Strategic and International Studies, Iran has developed one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East, potentially numbering several thousand systems with varying ranges and payloads. Some of these missiles are capable of striking targets more than 2,000 kilometers away. That range is significant. It places American military bases across the Gulf Israeli territory and key energy infrastructure within reach. This is why missile forces became Iran's most important strategic tool. Missiles allow Iran to threaten powerful adversaries without needing a large, modern air force. They also create uncertainty for opponents, forcing them to invest heavily in air defense systems. In military terms, missiles are Iran's deterrence. But deterrence works only if the weapons remain operational. That is why the recent strikes against missile infrastructure are so important. Military experts speaking to Defense News note that targeting launch facilities, storage sites, and command centers can gradually erode a missile network, even if large numbers of missiles still exist. Think of it like disabling the launch pads of a rocket program. The rockets may still exist, but they cannot be used effectively. If enough launch sites are disabled, large-scale missile attacks become much harder to organize. And that changes the strategic picture dramatically, because the United States operates powerful naval forces in the Persian Gulf. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and support vessels regularly patrol the region to maintain stability and protect international shipping routes. For years, Iranian ballistic missiles have been viewed as one of the primary threats to those naval forces. Some missile systems are designed specifically to target ships at sea. Others can strike ports and military bases that support American operations. Reducing that threat even partially opens the door for broader military options. It means aircraft carriers can move closer to operational areas. It allows fighter aircraft to launch more frequent sorties, and it makes sustained air campaigns easier to conduct. But the implications go far beyond military tactics. They extend into one of the most important geographic choke points on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. It is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, yet it carries a staggering portion of the world's energy supply. According to energy analysts and reports cited by Reuters, roughly 1/5 of the world's traded oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz every day. That means tankers carrying crude oil from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and other producers must pass through this narrow corridor. If the strait were ever closed, the economic consequences would ripple across the entire global economy. Energy markets would react instantly. Prices could surge, and international pressure to restore stability would intensify. For that reason, maintaining freedom of navigation through Hormuz has long been a core priority for the United States and its regional partners. Missiles stationed along Iran's southern coastline have historically been part of Tehran's strategy for influencing that balance. If Iran could threaten ships or energy infrastructure, it could create leverage during political crises. But if those missile systems are weakened, the calculus changes. The ability to disrupt shipping becomes less certain, and the strategic balance shifts. This is why the strikes against missile infrastructure are not just tactical operations. They are part of a larger strategic contest, a contest over power, influence, and control of one of the world's most critical energy corridors. And that contest is far from over. In the hours following the strikes, attention across the world quickly shifted to one place. Not a city, not a military base, but a narrow strip of water separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula, the Strait of Hormuz. This small maritime corridor has long been one of the most strategically important locations on the planet. Every day, massive oil tankers carrying crude from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and other producers pass through its waters on their way to global markets. According to energy data cited by Reuters, nearly 20% of the world's traded oil flows through this single choke point. That means the stability of the global energy system depends heavily on what happens here. For decades, Iran has understood the leverage this geography provides. Iran's southern coastline stretches along the northern edge of the strait, placing Iranian missile batteries, naval forces, and drone units within striking distance of the shipping lanes. During past crises, Iranian leaders have repeatedly warned that they could close the Strait of Hormuz if their national security were threatened. Those warnings were never taken lightly. According to analysis cited by Council on Foreign Relations, even a temporary disruption of shipping in the strait could send oil prices surging across global markets and create immediate pressure on governments around the world. This is why the region surrounding the strait has become one of the most heavily militarized waterways on Earth. The United States maintains naval patrols in the Gulf to ensure freedom of navigation. Allied nations, including Britain and several Gulf states, also contribute to maritime security operations designed to protect international shipping. But the current conflict has added a new layer of uncertainty. If Iran's missile infrastructure has indeed been weakened by recent strikes, its ability to threaten shipping lanes could be reduced. That would shift the strategic balance in the Gulf. At the same time, the political consequences of the strikes are unfolding rapidly. Governments across the Middle East are watching closely. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, two of the region's most powerful energy producers, have strong interests in maintaining open shipping routes through Hormuz. Any disruption could affect their export revenues and the stability of global energy markets. Israel, meanwhile, views Iran's missile and nuclear programs as one of the most serious long-term security threats in the region. According to security analysts cited by BBC News, the broader geopolitical contest between Iran and its rivals has increasingly become a struggle for influence across the Middle East. That struggle now intersects with the military developments unfolding in the Gulf. But the future of the conflict remains uncertain. Military analysts emphasize that even if several missile facilities have been damaged, Iran still retains a significant arsenal of drones, rockets, and other asymmetric capabilities. Iran has also invested heavily in naval tactics, designed specifically for the narrow waters of the Gulf. Fast attack boats, sea mines, and anti-ship missiles could still pose risks to shipping if tensions escalate further. This means the situation remains volatile. The strikes may have altered the battlefield, but they have not ended the confrontation. In fact, some experts warn that the coming weeks could determine whether the crisis stabilizes or spirals into a broader regional conflict. Much now depends on the decisions made by political leaders on all sides. Will the strikes lead to deterrence and de-escalation, or will they trigger further retaliation? The answer could shape the future of the Middle East, and perhaps the stability of global energy markets as well. Because in the end, this story is not only about missiles and bombers. It is about power. It is about geography. And it is about the fragile balance that keeps one of the world's most important regions from sliding into a much larger